You're wrong about architecture being neutral. The buildings, plazas, and streets around you are not passive backgrounds. They shape attention, behavior, emotion, and even the kind of thoughts you are able to have. You walk into a giant modern plaza, all concrete, glass, empty space, and hard echoes, and suddenly your thoughts feel thinner, less original, less alive. You stop daydreaming. You stop wandering mentally. You become functional. That feeling is not random. Some spaces do not just hold people, they shape them. And once you see how architecture can influence your emotions, your attention, and even your ability to think freely, modern cities start to look very different. Because this is not just about buildings, it is about power. It is about the invisible systems that do not control you by force, but by design. And one of the strangest things about modern life is that many of us are trying to think deeply inside environments that seem built to prevent exactly that. A public plaza looks like freedom. Open sky, open ground, open visibility. No walls closing in, no gates, no obvious restriction. But that is exactly what makes it so deceptive. Because openness is not the same thing as freedom. Some spaces are technically open, but emotionally closed. They do not welcome reflection. They do not invite lingering. They do not make you feel more human. They make you feel exposed. And exposure changes the mind. When you feel subtly watched, even if nobody is directly watching you, your brain behaves differently. You become self-aware in the wrong way. You start managing yourself, editing yourself, compressing yourself. You stop expanding inward. That is the trick. A place does not need to tell you what to think if it can quietly make deep thinking harder. That is the first illusion. Most people think buildings are passive, streets are passive, public spaces are passive. They think design is mainly about looks, convenience, maybe safety. But architecture is never just background. It is emotional programming in physical form. Every place tells your body something before your mind can put it into words. Safe or unsafe, warm or cold, human or impersonal, alive or dead, stay or move, rest or hurry, speak or stay quiet. And your body answers first. Before you say, "I do not like this place," your nervous system has already reacted. Your breathing changed. Your muscles adjusted. Your attention narrowed. Your imagination either opened up or shut down. That means space is doing something to you all the time. Not metaphorically, literally. Think about the average corporate plaza in a modern city. Flat, open ground, blank surfaces, hard edges, very little shade, very few soft materials. Massive buildings with no sense of intimacy, long sight lines, nowhere that feels naturally human. These spaces often look clean in photographs, efficient, impressive, contemporary, but in real life, they often feel emotionally dead, and that deadness matters. Because the mind does not bloom in every environment equally. Some places make you more playful, some make you more curious, some make you more social, some make you more reflective, and some make you shut down just enough to become easier to move, easier to manage, easier to predict. That is what is so unsettling. These spaces do not usually feel violently oppressive, slightly cold, slightly unnatural, but that slightness is powerful. Because you do not fight something that only makes you 15% less alive. You just adapt to it. Here is where it gets darker. What if the problem is not that these places are ugly? What if the problem is that they are behaviorally effective? A chaotic, warm, human space produces unpredictability. People stop, gather, linger, talk, observe, drift, create their own rhythms. Systems do not always love that. Systems love flow. Systems love predictability. Systems love movement that can be managed. Systems love spaces that reduce friction by reducing spontaneity. A person who lingers too much is inefficient. A crowd that gathers too naturally is hard to control. A place that invites depth, stillness, or genuine encounter can become politically and psychologically inconvenient. So what happens? You design spaces that are technically public, but behaviorally narrow. You do not ban freedom. You lower the emotional temperature until freedom becomes less likely to express itself. That is what invisible power often looks like, not repression, calibration. Concrete is not evil. Glass is not evil. Steel is not evil. But when these materials dominate everything, and when they are used at giant scales, with little warmth, texture, or softness, they create a very particular psychological effect. They make people feel small, not poetically, nervously. Your body reacts to hardness, to exposure, to repetition, to environments where there is nowhere to hide, nowhere to settle, nowhere to lean into comfort. And the more an environment feels impersonal, the more you begin to behave impersonally inside it. You become a role, a commuter, a consumer, a worker, a moving body between destinations. This is one of the quiet tragedies of modern life. Many people feel mentally fragmented, not only because of screens or stress, but because so much of the physical world around them no longer supports inwardness. The environment keeps saying, move, pass through, do not root, do not dwell, do not become too present here. Listen to what sound does to your mind. This part is easy to miss because people notice visual design first, but sound may be just as important. Some modern spaces are acoustically harsh. Every footstep echoes, every voice feels exposed, every sound bounces off hard surfaces and comes back flattened. Other spaces are filled with low-level mechanical noise, traffic hum, vents, distant engines, machinery, digital beeps, infrastructure murmurs, the constant soundtrack of a world that never fully rests. Neither one is neutral. Humans evolved with textured soundscapes, wind, leaves, water, birds, meaningful silence, voices with warmth and direction. But a dead or mechanically saturated acoustic environment creates a strange inner effect. It becomes harder to hear yourself, harder to settle, harder to enter the kind of quiet where real thought begins. That matters more than people realize, because thought does not happen only in the brain. It happens in relationship with the environment. And if the environment constantly keeps your nervous system half activated, your mind never fully lands. Have you ever walked through an old neighborhood, an old square, a historic street, and suddenly felt more like yourself? Not more entertained, more human. That feeling is not imaginary. Older places often give the mind what optimized environments remove: scale, texture, irregularity, detail, corners, thresholds, visual rhythm, signs of age, hints of memory. Your attention has something to hold on to: a carved door, a worn wall, a staircase shaped by thousands of previous lives, a street that turns instead of dominating you with straight-line exposure, a little square that feels discovered, not imposed. These places do not just look different, they produce a different state of consciousness, because they remind the nervous system that the world was made for dwelling, not just moving through. And that word matters: dwelling. Modern life gives us movement, it gives us access, it gives us speed, it gives us optimization. But dwelling, that is disappearing. And without dwelling, the mind becomes restless, obedient, externally driven. This is the point where many people get uncomfortable, because once you realize that spaces shape thought, you start asking a dangerous question. Who benefits from environments that make people less reflective, less rooted, less spontaneous, less inwardly free? Sometimes the answer is not a person, it is a system that values efficiency over intimacy, control over depth, visibility over mystery, function over soul. And when a system starts designing the human world mainly around extraction, regulation, movement, and measurable outcomes, something important happens. The inner life becomes a design inconvenience. A person with strong inwardness is harder to rush, harder to manipulate, harder to turn into pure economic behavior. But a person who is always slightly distracted, slightly exposed, slightly detached from their own internal depth, that person is much easier to steer. That is why this conversation is not really about architecture. It is about the politics of atmosphere. We think of interfaces as digital. Your phone is an interface. Your laptop is an interface. An app is an interface. But a city is also an interface. It tells you what kind of behavior fits, what pace is normal, what emotions are welcome, what kinds of stillness are awkward, what kinds of gathering are tolerated, what kinds of people seem to belong. A bench with dividers is an interface. A plaza with nowhere comfortable to sit is an interface. A train station designed to keep you flowing is an interface. A public place where you feel you should not stay too long is an interface. The city is always speaking to you, and its language is made of permissions. You may pass, you may buy, you may wait, you may work, but may you truly arrive? That question matters more than it seems, because when the built world stops letting people arrive psychologically, it slowly trains them to live on the surface of themselves. Modern systems love optimization. That sounds reasonable until you realize what gets sacrificed. When everything is optimized, mystery disappears. When everything is optimized, slowness looks suspicious. When everything is optimized, beauty must justify itself. When everything is optimized, unplanned humanity becomes a problem to solve. And this is where modern design sometimes becomes anti-human without meaning to. Not because it hates people, because it values the wrong things first. Maintenance over meaning, flow over encounter, legibility over depth, control over aliveness. And when that logic dominates long enough, people start adapting their expectations downward. They stop asking for places that nourish the soul. They settle for spaces that merely process them. That is one of the saddest victories of invisible systems. They do not just shape the world, they lower our imagination of what the world could be. Here is the part that hurts. When your environment weakens your inner life, you usually do not blame the environment. You blame yourself. You think your attention span is broken. You think you lost depth. You think you became shallow. You think you are just tired, distracted, or not who you used to be. But sometimes the problem is not that you are failing. Sometimes you are trying to stay mentally alive inside environments that quietly train deadness. That does not remove personal responsibility, but it changes the story. It means your struggle may not be purely personal. It may be architectural, systemic, atmospheric. And the moment you understand that, you stop seeing yourself only as a flawed individual. You begin seeing the hidden pressures around you, and that is the beginning of freedom. So, what can you actually do? Pay attention.